And as we're waiting for the next couple of minutes, just for folks to join on the call, I'd love it if you could introduce yourself in the chat and let me know where you're coming from, what got you excited about UX, and where you are in your UX journey currently. So would love to hear from you as you kind of introduce yourselves. And feel free to also introduce yourself and share your LinkedIn if you would like to network a little bit more. So we'll just wait maybe one more minute and it'll be great to get to know some folks via the chat. And for the folks just joining, welcome to UX Building Blocks, Atomic Design, AI Design, and UX Laws Made Simple. All right. I think we're going to just get right into it because we have a lot of material to cover today. What we're going to do is get right into the laws of UX, atomic design, how atomic design connects to AI design, and then more about UX Woman. So we're going to get right into laws of UX. So at this point, I'm imagining that a lot of the folks on this call have probably gotten their first taste of UX design and have a little bit of an introduction to UX design and the design process, whether that's through YouTube, articles, the Google Coursera course. And what we're doing is building onto that. So design and the design process starts with UX research and gathering context from users and stakeholders alike. And then we get into the design phase. Once we've really honed on one problem to solve, we come up with different solutions. And this is where atomic design and design laws and principles can really help us. So design laws, principles, and heuristics are really rooted in cognitive science and psychology, and they are modes of how all of us behave or how all of us perceive the world. And they are rules of thumb to help us design a new idea or feature or solution. And these rules of thumb are there to keep in mind as we design a new UX experience. What we're going to start with is Jacob's Law so that you can get a sense of what these UX laws are in particular. And we're only going to cover some of the main UX laws. There's a whole bunch of them. These are more principles or rules of thumb to adhere to. Most UX designers, especially if they're seasoned designers, tend to automatically think with these modes in mind and don't have to refer to the laws all the time. But when you're new to UX design, it's good to, review them and make sure that you understand what they are. So users spend, Jacob's Law basically states that users spend most of their time on other people's websites and applications rather than yours. So their mental models are formulated around existing digital design patterns. And that's why it's better not to design outside the box, but to think about what ecosystems your users are already living in. What are their existing mental models? So one example is Netflix being the OG streamer, right? Netflix was the first to stream movies and shows online. And after Netflix came out, there were other streamers that came up, other competitive streamers. But you'll also notice that when TVs are designed, like Roku TV, I happen to work for X-Class TV, which is Comcast TV. All of these TV designs are also designed to mimic the OG streamer, right? Because Netflix kind of set the stage in the streaming industry and the entertainment business for what streaming should look and feel like. And since then, we're used to seeing a similar template across each of the streaming competitors and even some of the TVs, even though TVs are not really a competitor of streamers, but it's all living in that same entertainment space. And so there's certain mental models that are just common across the media and entertainment industry. And that was set by the OG, which is Netflix. So that's something to start to think about. When you're a new designer, innovation doesn't necessarily mean visual design. It is usually the innovation around what's the differentiator or the business model or the experience, but that doesn't necessarily mean that every element in your experience needs to be mind-bogglingly different, right? So a lot of times we can rely on these laws and patterns to help us come up with templates that cognitively feel intuitive to our users because they've already used similar applications to the one that we're using. Another example to think about is Tinder, right? So Tinder, and this is a great example because when Tinder first came out, it was one of its kind, right? It was the first dating app to really focus on a different type of target market. But when Tinder came out, it was usually Match.com and OkCupid that were the big online dating apps. But most people met up in person or met at bars or public events and spaces or through work. And in sites like Match.com and OkCupid, it was very common to, have to fill out this really long resume-like profile on a desktop computer. And it almost felt like a job application, right? And Tinder actually was not innovative in only in its visual design, but also in the market that it targeted. Apps like Match.com and OkCupid were targeting folks who wanted more serious relationships, more of a committed relationship. But Tinder was the first to just want to break the barriers towards meeting someone new in your life, or like make a friend, a new friend, and just start a conversation. So Tinder was the first of its dating app of its kind to really target the more casual dater, the dater who was looking more for friendships and meetups as opposed to like a lifelong commitment or a marriage. And not only was Tinder very innovative in that sense in the market that they targeted, they didn't target individuals in their 30s and 40s like Match.com and OkCupid did, but they targeted college level, young adults. That was one way they were innovative, but another way they were innovative was to make the dating scene for college age individuals really fun and playful. So Tinder Swipe is actually born out of real life interactions. And when the designers were designing Tinder, the first version of Tinder, the MVP or minimum viable product, did not have the swipe, but the second version did. And what they did was they started to mimic the swipe right, swipe left to be like a card game because they wanted to gamify this dating experience. And it needed to feel like organizing cards and putting them into piles. So that felt very intuitive and playful to users and kept users engaged on the app, especially college age professionals who are looking for a more casual, lighter dating scene. And this kept them, kept it very simple. They had to reduce the number of buttons on the screen, which was great. And it was a shortcut in terms of the interaction design of the product itself. So that is another example of Jacob's Law, just because, the first example, Netflix, was more about an OG streamer who set the standard essentially in the entertainment business. But here, Tinder is the first of its kind, targeting a new dating market and using something more physical like a stack of cards to make the interactions and the visual design more playful. So that's just another example of how you can apply real life interactions into your design. And you see this a lot with the Apple iPhone too, right? When you see it with icons, we have, the timer, the calculator. So when we set an alarm, we see a little alarm clock. When we want to check our email, we see a little mailbox. And so there's a lot of these, elements from our physical lives that carry on into the digital world, similar to what Tinder did with the card swiping. So a lot of this is just to say that you need to consider both direct and indirect competitors and experiences when you're considering Jacob's Law, because Jacob's Law considers everything. It really considers where the attention span of all your users or your target user base is going, right? Tinder realized that their, college age professionals are playful, they like to have fun. And so they were considering indirect competitive experiences as well, like card games, even though those were not, direct competitors. And another way you can look at indirect competitors is what Netflix did when they launched a feature called Play Something back in 2021. So back in 2021, I don't know if you remember, but we were in the thick of the pandemic, or maybe not the thick, maybe we were getting to the end of the pandemic, or we were in the middle of the pandemic. And that is when TikTok really blew up, right? So all of us were, at home more often, and late night we were probably scrolling TikTok. And sometimes you can spend hours scrolling TikTok. And the beauty about TikTok is that you just see one piece of content at a time, and it makes it really easy to just open the app and start engaging and just go into passenger mode because you're consuming all this content. So, even though TikTok is not a direct competitor of Netflix, it is pretty clear that Netflix was losing some time to TikTok, right? Because instead of me going and watching a Netflix show, I might have gone and scrolled on TikTok at night. And that is an example of Jacob's Law. Just because TikTok is not a direct competitor of Netflix, it doesn't mean that the users of Netflix were spending more or less time on TikTok or Netflix, right? So Netflix started to study why people were so addicted to TikTok during that time. And they also studied something called channel surfing because even when we watch TV, sometimes we're just very distracted and we can get into this mode of channel surfing where we click from one channel to the next. And we're just kind of trying to get a taste for a couple of seconds about what something is before we decide that we want to watch it. And so Netflix engaged with those types of behaviors and started to come up with this feature called Play Something back in 2021. And the feature was if you clicked Play Something, it was essentially like TikTok or channel surfing, and you could watch a piece of a show or movie at random that Netflix selected for you based on its algorithm. And then if you didn't want to watch it, you could skip it to the next one. Netflix ended up taking down Play Something. Clearly, they A/B tested it, and it was a feature that didn't gain enough traction. But most of the best and innovative companies are constantly A/B testing so that they can improve their experiences. So it's really great to watch Netflix A/B test features in the wild. I think right now they're A/B testing more of their gaming and game features. Now that Black Mirror has come out, I've been seeing a lot of Black Mirror games. And so that's been interesting to see how Netflix is getting into gaming and sports as well. Um, so remember that you don't need to reinvent the wheel when you're designing something. Can your design be so good that it's almost invisible, right? Like the Tinder swiping, there were no buttons that you had to click, you just had to swipe. Same thing with Netflix or TikTok, right? You come into the platform and you're already engaged with content. With Netflix, they like to show ads and previews of their different shows, and that engages you to choose the content that you would like. And so that brings me to Hicks' law. So Hicks' law really says that the time to make a decision increases with the amount or complexity of the number of choices. So yes, when Netflix was the first streamer, one of their key differentiators and why they put, businesses like Blockbuster out of business was because they had all this incredible selection of content online, readily available and accessible so that you didn't have to go and get a DVD back in the day. And so that was a big differentiator, and their number of choices in content were something that made them the OG streamer. However, as apps like TikTok came about, it was really easy for folks to just not have to make a decision because when you open the TikTok app, one piece of content is automatically fed to you and you do not have to make choices, right? So that TikTok was really adhering to Hicks' law and making everything super simple. Users didn't even have to make a choice. The choice was made for them, and you could just keep swiping if you didn't like the content that you saw. So that actually put Netflix at a disadvantage because all of a sudden, Netflix is losing the attention span of users to TikTok, where users don't have to make any decisions and they can go on passenger mode and just watch a bunch of entertaining content. So Netflix was trying to, come to a balance, I would say, between having this incredible repository of content, but surfacing only the most relevant pieces of content to their audiences. And of course, their homepage does a pretty good job of it. And their ad previews do a good job of helping us narrow down content, but they were trying to get to a TikTok level of specificity where you might just land on Netflix and Netflix just automatically knows what you want. And that level of intuition isn't there yet. Netflix has realized that, hey, maybe we do need to present folks with choices, show them things like the top 10 movies and top 10 show lists, show people different genres because we don't know what mood folks are in and what they want to watch. And so that's kind of Netflix Play Something, I would argue, is Netflix's way to leverage their AI and their recommendations platform to keep users engaged on their homepage to deliver that relevant content. And of course, that means they had to reduce the number of options they presented, right? Netflix has thousands of titles available in their repository, but they can only show you maybe 5 tiles of content per row, and maybe 15 tiles of content when you first land on their homepage. And so they're really trying to reduce the number of options, but really get hyper specific on what they think you're most likely to want to watch. And so Netflix is now approaching the problem a little bit differently. They're not, releasing features like play something and trying to, compete at a level that TikTok is competing in. But they're trying to do something different instead because they have different types of content. Long form content is just a different ballgame. And another example of Hick's law is Amazon's one-click buy. So Amazon is the one company that makes it super, super easy to buy something or purchase something in one click or through a voice order to Alexa. And that really helps them supercharge sales because the one-click buy is the most efficient checkout process. If you'll notice, most checkout processes on most applications take at least 2 to 5 steps to complete. But Amazon is the only place where they have the one-click buy, and that's for technical reasons. There's certain technicalities behind how the one-click buy works that led Amazon to actually patent the one-click buy. So the only other company that uses the one-click buy has to license the one-click buy from Amazon. And that company is Apple. So Apple in Apple Music has the one-click buy as well, but they have to license that from Amazon, which is why you don't see that many companies using it. And so, of course, by Hick's law, because Amazon made something so simple like the checkout process, they have really supercharged and streamlined their sales. And so with that, that's kind of an introduction to some of these laws and how you can start to look at examples of these laws in the real world, right? So think about what are some of your most favorite applications to use. Is it Spotify? Is it Netflix? Is it Tinder? Is it Hinge? Is it OpenAI? Whatever it is, start to pay attention to the laws and principles being used in some of your favorite applications. Or it could be applications you just happen to use on a daily basis, like Gmail, LinkedIn, Google Maps. And so there's other laws that we didn't visit, and these are more visual design laws and principles. I wanted to focus more on the high-level laws and the more strategic laws to show you their value and their importance and how large companies like Netflix and Amazon leverage those laws. But there's other laws you can consider as well. There's a whole website for UX laws that you can go to, and this is what is pulled from that website. And so one of them is the law of proximity. Objects that are near or proximate to each other tend to be grouped together. The law of similarity. The human eye tends to perceive similar elements in a design as a complete picture, shape, or group, even if these elements are separated. And so we're now starting to get into more of the visual design principles. Miller's law is a really good one. The average person can only keep 7 plus or minus 2 items in their working memory. This is probably why Netflix only showcases 5 tiles per row rather than 9 or 10, or making it super complex. So these are great laws to start to consider, especially as you're getting into visual design, but more importantly, as you're getting into design systems and something called atomic design, which is sort of the foundation of building a new design system. So these heuristics and visual principles can all be tied together within atomic design and then more broadly within building a design system from scratch. So with that, I'm going to share a little bit about atomic design as well. Atomic design breaks up elements on a page into atoms, molecules, organisms, and templates. So this is an example of how atomic design works. When we look at Instagram, for example, we can start at the holistic page view, which is what we all consume as users of the application. We see and scroll through multiple pieces of content, whether that's pictures or videos from friends and families and influencers every day. We get to like videos, we get to look at different people's profiles, we get to look at our own profile, we get to search for things, and so on and so forth. But, we can also break it down more into a template format. So just before it goes into production, Instagram on the design end is being designed as a template, right? And in a template, there's a template for a video post, or there's a template for a photo post, or there's a template for what a user profile needs to look like. And at this stage, those templates are not populated with real user data, but are just there to show us the organization and the structure of what that page or template should look like. And then we can break it down even further. So that template consists of multiple organisms. When we look at, for example, the scrolling feed of Instagram, we can see that, we can break it down into the header, the footer, and then the actual post within the feed. And so there's 3 organisms that make up that template. And then if we break it down even further, we can see that there's, icon sets for the header. This, photo or feed post can be broken down into the description of the post, the number of likes, the panel where you can engage with the content itself, the piece of content, and then a header talking about who posted the content, as well as, the header of the app itself. And then when we're looking at an atomic level, we're thinking about things like buttons, labels, text and typography, and images. And so we can think of it from a very structural, almost a scientific perspective when we're thinking about designing from the ground up, from the atomic level into pages, or from the page level into atoms and structures. And it just depends on what type of thinker you are. Some folks like to build things from the atom up. So you can think about Lego blocks, right? Legos are the little building blocks that we use to build entire scenes and sets and pieces of architecture or tools. Or you could have more of a high level understanding and build from the top down. And you can come up with, high level wireframes and how the architecture needs to work, and then put in more of the color and the format and the style and the design system into play. So there's no right or wrong answer. Different folks approach the problem in different ways, and that's the beauty about design and creativity. But this is just something for you to consider of the breakdown when it comes to atomic design. And so that is essentially what atomic design is. It is that breakdown of heavy data set ideas into really simple designs. And I also wanted to share a few examples from my own work throughout my career. I'll talk about my career towards the end of the program, but I was working consulting for a healthcare pharma company. And so we wanted to create entire pages of different healthcare information for healthcare professionals. So that meant showcasing a lot of healthcare products, which tended to be drugs or clinical trials and studies. And we wanted to find ways to create both short form content and long form content for these very complex pieces of information, right? When we have to showcase a product in the healthcare world, there's a lot of regulation that goes on behind the scenes on how we need to showcase that type of information. So we came up with a short form piece of content. You could see this, it's almost like a molecule. And you can see there's another tile for a product, but this is a little bit more of a long form or mid form piece of content. And then you can finally see a larger tile about the product, and you can see a lot more information and how you might be able to click into different aspects of that product tile. Same thing with case studies. You might see a short description of a case study or clinical trial, and then you might see a long form piece of content showcasing more information. And so we're really just playing around with how much content we are showcasing to a healthcare professional when they first land on that type of organism or molecule. And those components end up creating entire pages, right? So we can have a page focusing on compounds, we could have a page focusing on clinical trials, and so on and so forth. Another project that I worked on was also working for a conferencing call company, similar to what you see at Zoom, and coming up with different templates and pages for how the same pieces of content and information could be laid out in different ways so that we could A/B test these different templates and pages and see which was the winner. And so again, we created modules or organisms with the same pieces of content, right? It's start your video meeting or call into your meeting, which is always prioritized as the top 2 modes of action, but there's just different ways to deliver on that content. And so playing around with that same concept of short form or long form tile content, we created really short form tiles that you see at the right-hand side here versus more long form tiles with more detail and more information. And wanted to see, what was the winner? How much information do we need to present to the user for them to feel comfortable with making a certain decision or making a choice? And I tend to be more of a holistic thinker. So I like to think when it comes to atomic design in terms of templates and competitors. So as you see, the way I've presented the laws, Jacob's Law and Hicks' Law, is really to start to think from a competitor perspective first, to see what's in the landscape of what you're designing for and where you're designing, and then start to break it down into the molecular, organism, and atomic levels. So when I was working for this free conference call company, I started to think in terms of templates, looking at indirect competitors like Zoom, Google Meets. There's a company called Whereby that does, online free digital conferencing. There's Microsoft Teams. And we started to look at all their different templates. We also looked at indirect competitors like Slack, right? So I loved how Slack had this left-hand side navigation panel, and that, I thought could be interesting for a conferencing company as well. And so now you start to see at a very bare bones, low fidelity level, how we can start to play around with the conferencing screen and how different pieces of content can pop up depending on what we're clicking. And you can see that, content could pop up to the right-hand side of the screen or the left-hand side of the screen or the bottom panel of the screen. And so we started to play with, what would it be like to pop up one feature set versus what would it be like to pop up multiple features like a chat bar as well as an invitation bar or panel? And how could we kind of streamline things so that, people were not getting distracted during a call or conference? And that's when we started to get more into mid fidelity. So now we're starting to think a little bit about color only when, we wanted to show a click state or a link, or like a end call sort of option. But we're starting to get into more mid fidelity designs. And this is something I wanted to show you because we were essentially redesigning their entire design system, which is why we started from a very bare bones wireframe concepting level, showcasing how we were pulling from different indirect and direct competitors. This is more of a Slack design. This is very reminiscent of Zoom, or this is very reminiscent of Google Hangouts, for example. And then we started to put together what our unique design system and design language could look like specific to free conference call. How would we arrange the icons in the bottom panel? And how would we showcase our share screen functionality, because we had different features like a broadcaster tool, which is not something that Zoom tends to advertise a lot. And then, you start to see that these mid-fidelity screens start to dive a little bit more into high fidelity. So now we're thinking more about individual steps in a flow. So how would you actually, screen share a image or a PDF? And how could you upload a file to do that for the broadcaster if you were presenting something like a presentation, for example? And so we were playing around with different concepts that started to lead us to our more high fidelity experience that we then broke down. So just like how atomic design breaks down elements on a screen, we also had to break down elements to design and flows to design, right? It's not like we're going to design an entirely new conferencing application all in 1 year, but we had to break it down. So what was strategic was to first really make the joining the meeting really easy. And that was a strategic first step. So we would start by, redesigning particular screens with this new design system we had come up with, and then slowly and gradually updating the entire design system of the product, which would obviously take time. And yes, there would be kind of this ugly phase where we were using elements of both design systems. But when we were building this new design system, we were also considering overlaps, right? So as new as some of these concepts are, and as new as some of the architecture behind these concepts are new, we were still using elements at the atomic level from the old design system. So, how buttons are styled, the typography, the color, that was still true to the old design system. What was really getting a refresh was more of the structure and the information architecture. As you can see, we're cleaning up a lot in terms of simplifying what you see on the screen and simplifying the content you're seeing on the screen so that users can make decisions in a quicker and easier manner, improving the usability, findability, navigation, and content clarity of the product. And so again, here you're seeing another before and after. As you can see, this is not like Zoom. This is not like Google Hangouts, although we pulled inspiration from those elements and competitors in our initial explorations. But you can see kind of the stage where we're getting to using at the atomic level elements from the old design system, but completely redefining elements of the design system at the same time, which I think is really exciting and kind of shows you that kind of ugly duckling phase that a lot of companies go through. Design systems varies a lot at different companies. So this was more of a small to mid-sized company. We had about 10 million users globally, which still makes it a small business because we were a small team, right? We had about 5 designers. Actually, no, it was 3 designers, 1 researcher, and a couple of folks on the marketing team. So we're working with a really small team when it comes to kind of managing this 10 million person user base. And you'll see that in startups like to move fast, right? So startups might not have a very robust design system, but sometimes that carries into when startups suddenly blow up and they are now mid-sized businesses or corporations, but their design system is not very organized. And you're working with a lot of like different Figma files and they're not very organized. And you're trying your best to organize things as you go, but the pace of the startup is so fast that you're really doing very minimal design systems maintenance work because you're constantly pushing features during dev sprints. However, when you work at a larger corporation, the Disneys, the Apples, the Amazons, the Comcast TVs of the world. When I was a designer for Comcast TV, I was still designing screens, but the difference was that there was an entire design systems team, a team of about 10 folks who were constantly updating a design systems for all the design teams. And design teams at these large companies can span 50 to 100 individuals, right? So that design systems team really has to make sure that every element that all the other design teams use are standardized to the design system so that, a big brand like Disney or Comcast can have that really standardized look and approach. And so what ends up happening is when you're a designer working in some of those companies, you're constantly refreshing or updating your files to make sure you have the most updated version of your design system available. And then you're making edits to one specific workflow or one specific element in the app, but still using the most updated design system from the design system team. And so that was what the work was like at Comcast and XClass TV when I was designing for TV screens, where I was really focused on a transactions flow. And the user had to input their credit card information through the TV screen as well as a mobile app. And that was the one piece that I had to work on. But I was pulling from the design systems team. And so that made my job a lot easier because I could go into working into high fidelity screens from day one rather than working at the mid and low fidelity level and redefining a design system. So I wanted to share an example of redefining and coming up with a design system and a new design language from scratch or at like that mid level where it's kind of a compromise between the old and new. But when you're working in large corporations, you won't be required to do that type of work. You would be required to more so use the existing design system, sometimes starting to design in high fidelity right away. So it really just depends on the type of role that you land. If you're someone who is that Lego builder who likes to build things from the ground up, like I do, you should go for startup work. And you as a product designer or UX designer will get very invested in design systems and you'll just learn on the job how to handle design systems. If you're not that type of person, if you are someone who likes to work on a very specific flow and use preset definitions, you can work at corporate. Corporate will give you those preset instructions on the design system and you can use those elements. So this is another before and after, more pulled from a Google Meets style inspiration. And you can see the difference between what existed before, I'm sitting behind that screen, and after. And I'm just showing you elements of how, this design system is coming to life. And you can see even, we're using a lot of the same typography and even some of the similar icons, but we are just, the organization and the content clarity and the architecture has changed drastically. Same thing here with the participant functionality. And then this is some of my oldest work when I was freelancing as a designer while going through grad school. And so here you can see that, sometimes you have to build design systems from scratch, which I did for a small startup, but I also had to consider responsive design. So for this startup in particular, I had to show them what it would look like, what the designs could look like on an HD desktop versus a landing desktop or a tablet experience versus different mobile phones. So the best practice is always to design for the smallest mobile phone because you want to make sure that you're very constricted in terms of your size so you can understand what the most constricted version of your design system needs to look like. But also to design for a smaller desktop and tablet, I would say is a good practice as well. So remember, when we're getting into this conversation on laws, atomic design systems, don't miss the forest for the trees. What's more important? Is it the atoms that are more important or the templates? And I would argue it's the templates, it's the architecture, it's the overall strategy. As long as your design system is contributing to improved usability, content clarity, architecture, findability, navigation, that's a design system that's working for you. If your design system is a bit hodgepodge and it's actually decreasing usability, content clarity, navigation, and findability, then it's not working for you, right? It means that you're due for an upgrade or a refresh. And so I think it's really interesting and exciting now that we're getting into the world of AI design. We're seeing a lot more larger companies focus on AI features, and atomic design, I would argue, plays a large role in AI design as well. So in AI design systems, we're essentially designing for uncertainty because a lot of the times the designers and even the engineers who are building these AI products don't really know what's going to come out of the output for this AI system, right? It's a black box. So the way AI works, a very quick, bare bones, very simple explanation is that the user will provide certain inputs to the AI algorithm or AI interface, and then the AI will take those inputs. It goes into layers and layers of thinking and processing and learning, and it provides output at the other side. No one knows what those layers of thinking and processing look like. No one knows how AI comes up with what it comes up with. We just see the inputs we provide and the outputs. That learning, the training of the AI, that is all kind of a black box, right? AI learns in a very similar way to how humans learn. And when we give and input large data sets into these large language models like OpenAI, Gemini, the engineers themselves cannot always tell you how AI is learning what it's learning, which means we're designing for a lot of uncertainty. So keep in mind that AI relies on inputs and provides outputs, and that's what you need to know as a designer to design for uncertainty. If a user input is incorrect, AI cannot deliver a good output. So AI design systems or AI systems are designed to help users input the right information and help verify that information. One example of this is when you're typing into Google, Google starts to give you different options, right? Did you mean this? Design systems examples? Did you mean design systems engineer, engineering jobs? And as we keep typing, AI is narrowing down what we're intending. So AI is trying to collect the best input from us, and that's what your AI design system needs to do. Now, AI also can provide outputs, whether it's certain or uncertain about what the person wants, right? So not every AI output is 100% correct or certain. There's usually some outputs are going to be 99% correct or certain. Some outputs are going to be 80% correct or certain. Some outputs might even be as low as 50 to 60% certain or correct. So AI isn't always sure about what users want, but if we provide more specific information or AI is able to gather specific information, it can provide higher certainty outputs. And when we are more certain about what the output needs to be, we can streamline it to provide one option to the user on whether they want it or not, and they can either accept or reject that option. And that helps users work through things faster. So if AI is very certain, for example, 99.9% certain that you want to take a faster route, let's say on Google Maps, what they will show is, hey, there's a faster route available. Or they'll tell you, hey, there's a crash ahead, there's a 13-minute delay. And AI is pretty sure you have the fastest route. And it's already analyzed all the traffic and information from that area to get you that answer that there's a faster route available. So this is one example where it's more certain that it knows what you want to do, and it just gives you the option to accept or reject it. Again, especially in a driving situation, AI does not want to distract you while you're driving, so they make it super simple, and this pop-up only shows up if they are a certain level of certain. Of course, as a user, I can't tell you what the Google algorithm is coded to be like, is this 90% certain, 95%? We're not sure. At one point, Netflix, back in the day, would show us the percentage of certainty for each of its recommendations. They would say, hey, this title, like, we're 98% sure that you're into this. We're 80% sure you're into that. Now they don't show that percentage of certainty. And I really wish they would bring that back for nerdy people like me who actually like to dig behind the hood to see what's going on with some of these applications. But when AI is not certain about your need, it should ideally provide multiple options to you so that you can select from and prioritize the options that you like. This is what works really well with apps like Netflix and Spotify, where when you first land on the homepage of Netflix, they are not 100% sure about any piece of content you want to watch. They're probably 99% sure you want to pick up on some of the shows you are watching and continue where you left off on a certain episode. So they tend to prioritize at the top, but you might be interested in something new. So they prioritize other genres, rows of genres or elements as well. And they have different levels of certainty. So that's when, apps like Netflix and Spotify use galleries to showcase multiple options because they're not sure what you want. And that's, I would say, a more ethical approach to design. And we're now starting to see, even in terms of how does that relate to atomic design? I would say that, Google search is a great example of where atomic design comes into play and where we as designers can leverage the uncertainty of AI outputs based on designing it more of that molecular and organism level. So right now, if I did this Google search on UX design, I'm seeing this 2-column layout. I'm seeing different templates, right? There's ads here. There's more visual data here. There's also what other people search for in the second column. There's the AI overview. There's Reddit social forums and discussions. And then there's, of course, a search result and people also ask. So there's all these different organisms essentially that designers have designed, but the AI is the one that's prioritizing it, right? We don't know, or the designer doesn't know what AI is going to prioritize depending on the search. But if I typed in another search, for example, if I typed in this search, what did I type in? I can't see because that panel on Zoom is coming up. But I think I typed in UX courses. Again, the search looks very different. So I see sponsored content, I see courses. By the way, most people just skip the sponsored content because they know it's sponsored. So most people end up just going straight to the first search results. And you're seeing how, between UX design versus UX courses, the layout looks very different. So as a designer, we're designing for a lot of uncertainty. And I think analyzing apps like this gives us clues into how to use atomic design principles and start to get more comfortable, more designing at that molecular and organism level, because AI is the one going to be creating the template or the page and prioritizing different organisms and molecules on the page. you don't know what it's going to create. So you need to create multiple templates, like this 2-column layout versus the 1-column layout, but also give it different options on what it can prioritize first, whether it's the overview, the questions, the social, the images, the ads. And so if we can start to play at more of that molecular to organism level, coming up with ranges of short form to long form content, I think we become better designers for AI. So this is going back to what we did at the healthcare consulting, right? It's the same product, but just different levels of information are showcased for that same product. And we're really coming up with multiple ideas for long form versus short form content at more of a molecular and organism level. And we're going to let AI do the prioritizing, right? It's not up to us. Like, we don't know what the person's going to search. We don't know what the search result has to be. AI is going to determine that. And so we have to give up control as designers to an AI system that is much smarter than us. But we can build a system to provide more options to users and provide ethical options and give them multiple options when needed. So that's all I'm going to say about AI design because it is still very up and coming. And this is still the bare bones language of AI design systems. If you would like to learn more, you should definitely take our 0 to 1 AI design innovation class, which is available online. It has about 6 hours of content on AI design systems. But I'm going to very quickly go into our story at UX Woman. So my name is Samaya. I'm a founder at UX Woman. I have about 9 years of expertise across startups, consulting, corporate, working for brands like Disney, Hulu, Marvel, Squarespace, J&J, Meta, Ford, you name it. And I've had my share of corporate. I've had my share of working for different startups. So now I'm focusing on my own company. My early career was really chaotic. I studied mechanical engineering and coding at Carnegie Mellon University. I actually did code some AI back in the day in 2014, very basic. And then I got my first job as a customer service manager at an ed tech startup, which is when I really started to think about UX and user experiences. I met my co-founder. We created Ideate Labs together. And then during my mid-career, it was still very chaotic. I got my first UX research job after the startup job. I went into consulting for companies like Meta and J&J and Ford and so on. I started setting up UX practices at other companies. I felt like something was missing because I only understood design and I just didn't see the big picture. And when I went to work to set up research practices at more mid-sized companies, I realized when I was working with senior executives that I didn't know how to explain things to them from a business perspective. And they were like, well, yeah, Samaya, I get that you love research, but how's this going to affect my bottom line? How's this going to impact my revenues? How's this going to increase my conversion rates? And I didn't always have the best answers for them. So I went back to grad school. I went to Wharton to really understand the business side of things. It was a interdisciplinary program, so I got to go to the engineering school, the design school, and of course the business school. And that's when everything really clicked for me and it became very intense. So at that point in time, I had failed at a consulting startup I had tried to create before I went into grad school. I created a new startup in grad school that failed as well. After I graduated, at the same time, I started, Ideate Labs, my co-founder, and I also became a UX manager at that conferencing company that I was showing you some of my initial design systems work. And so it was really an exciting time because I was in this in-between stage where Ideate Labs became the first successful business that we launched. It actually made revenues, it actually grew and had a user base, and it was not a failure. And at the same time, I had this management job, so I was doing a little bit of both. And I was starting to see, okay, this is what, career intensity is like, but I couldn't really sustain that, right? It was a lot on my plate to be a manager full time and be an entrepreneur. And so I had to start to make decisions on what was more meaningful to me and what were my values essentially. And so I continued to be in that intense mid-career phase for a little bit. I continued to work on Ideate Labs. We grew Ideate Labs to about 50,000 learners. At the same time, my manager at Disney discovered one of my YouTube videos, similar to the one that I'm doing right now. And I ended up working for Disney, building inclusive design curriculum, as well as being a UX researcher. And I started to really define values for myself at that point in time. And so when I left Disney, I realized that, I wanted to build UX Woman. My co-founder and I split from Ideate Labs last year. So I wanted to found UX Woman based on my values and commitment to helping women, immigrants, the LGBTQ community, and people of color break into tech. And so that is my mission right now. And that is what we do at UX Woman. So with that, I encourage you to check out some of our free resources on the UX Woman website. We have a lot of free UX courses and lessons on our YouTube, but you should also check out our 0 to 1 AI innovation course if you're interested in learning more about AI. If you're interested in a really deep dive into design systems, really consider our 7-month UX Design MBA program. It is about 7 weeks of UX research and business strategy, 7 weeks of UX design and design systems, and then 3 months of career coaching and learning what it's like to consult and become a UX consultant or freelancer, as well as potentially monetize your own UX design or digital design ideas, and really consider building a side hustle for yourself. I think we are in a world and in an industry that is constantly changing. And I think it's good to build multiple skill sets. So I think the most successful designers build a brand for themselves. What does my brand of design look like? And then they also are able to work full-time at large corporates, but they might also be entrepreneurs and content creators in their personal lives and daily lives. So that is my 2 cents on the state of design today. And I will stop sharing so that you can ask me a few questions with the time that we have left. Do you have any book suggestions for designers to read to understand more about business? Yes, I would recommend looking more into Blue Ocean Strategy, which we cover in our curriculum. Business is not something that is theoretical, and neither is design. Design and business are very application focused and action-oriented practices. So you can read all you want about business theory and design theory, but the real value is in the doing. And that's what we focus on in our 7-month MBA. It's more about how the process of reiterating on your MVP, the process of rethinking your business model. It's also really the biggest mindset shift is to think about how comfortable with failure are you, right? I had to fail at 2 startups and look, quite frankly, like an idiot. Well, and you're like, you tell your family and friends, hey, I'm starting this thing, and then it fails, and then you start another thing and it fails, and then you start the third thing and it finally hits. It's really about getting comfortable with failure, and it's really less about the theory and more about the mindset and the practice and how you put that practice and process into place, I would say. Yes, the slides and recording will be uploaded to our YouTube after this session. What do you think about AI when it comes to design jobs? Do you think AI will limit some jobs? That is, of course, the ongoing discussion right now. I will say I am reading headlines from companies like Shopify and Duolingo that recently announced that they are limiting their hiring, and they want a lot of limiting their contract work too. And they want a lot of their design teams to really leverage AI so that the design teams themselves can focus on more creative work. So what I think is, yes, it's going to become harder for entry-level designers to break in, because entry-level designers back in the day were tasked with more production-level jobs, right? Like as a junior researcher, I had to take notes during interviews. Now AI does that for me. I had to do initial synthesis, right? Now AI can do that for me. And same thing with designers. We had more production level tasks in Figma, which maybe is now a little bit more streamlined. So I think that just encourages entry-level designers to showcase their more strategic and creative work rather than showcasing more of their production level skills. It's not enough to just learn Figma. what will impress a hiring manager is if you can really be thoughtful about design systems that we were talking about today and how you create a new design systems language, perhaps from scratch, or perhaps you're improving an existing design system. And why are your improvements better than what was before? How do you answer those questions? I think when they see your strategic work, when they see your creative work, and when it's put like that, I think then you have more of a chance of standing out as a candidate. Thoughts on the terminology PX design? I have not heard of it in the mainstream, so if you could educate me on that, I haven't heard of it. Any other questions? And actually, if you wanted to look into more of the terminology of things, I'm not, for me, it's like potato, potato sometimes. There's a lot of different terminologies in UX, and sometimes I almost think that this terminology is almost a form of gatekeeping and to try and make things sound fancier than they are. So our whole point at UX Women is to make the language really accessible and to put things in very simple terminologies. Yes, product experience designer, some of it can be a marketing tactic. Um, I see the word product designer and UX designer used pretty interchangeably. I will say that product designers tend to focus more on the actual product itself. So whether it's the mobile app or the desktop application, versus UX designers might focus on the entire customer experience, which means pre-purchase of the product as well as post-purchase experiences of the product. And when I'm talking about pre-purchase experiences, I'm talking about social media design, email campaign design, ads design. I'm talking about the website design and the website experience. When I'm talking about post-purchase, I'm talking about customer experience and complementary upsells or cross sells or things like that. So that's the difference between what I'm seeing with UX design titles versus product design titles. Product experience, product design, potato, potato to me. It's all the same. I think what's more important is reading the job description and seeing what skill sets they're actually looking for. My transition from mechanical engineering to UX, great to see a fellow CMU alum, Winnie. Honestly, I just tried to grab the first job I could out of college, which was a customer service manager at an ed tech startup. And that was just where I landed. And it took some due diligence and like soul searching on my end to really realize I was not happy in that role. It was not a fulfilling role. It was very rote. It was not very creative. And then that led to my transition into UX. All right, I do have another presentation coming up. So I will have to, uh, pause on the questions, but if you have more questions, really consider looking at our 7-month UX Design MBA program. And yes, great to see you in the next one, but thank you all for joining. I really appreciate it. Awesome. I'll see you in the next one.